Alright kids, sit down and listen to what Dad has to say. This is going to require a little context. Once upon a time in the Wild West of PC gaming, id Software were bigger than the Beatles, and that's not a terrible comparison to make either. They let loose a string of games, one after the other, that changed the way we look at, play, and develop PC games. They were led by two inarguable geniuses, John Carmack and John Romero. Two opposite sides of the coin that complemented each other's style to such a degree that everything they touched was gold. Now, if you've watched my Quake videos, and you should have at this point, you already know how this story goes. Back to the Beatles analogy for a moment. Imagine if Paul McCartney kept Ringo in the band and got two new guitarists to keep releasing albums under the Beatles banner, while John Lennon made up with George Harrison and put together a new band, while Yoko Ono watched from the corner scheming. That's basically how id Software and Ion Storm were viewed back then. The remaining Beatles and the former Beatles in a hot new band that don't take no shit from no one. Ion Storm was comprised of John Romero, Tom Hall, formerly of id Software, and Warren Spector. Prior to Ion Storm, Spector had worked on such games as Ultima, Wing Commander, and the original System Shock. During their brief time at Ion Storm, Tom Hall developed an RPG called Anachronox, which received mostly high praise, but was hindered by the fact that Ion Storm shut down shortly after it released. And Spector developed a little game called Deus Ex, which you kids may or may not know as one of the best PC games ever made. Top 10 at the very least. The hype surrounding all of this was insane, and that's putting it mildly. I was a devoted reader of PC Gamer back in the mid-90s, so I could keep up with game reviews and previews and dream about becoming a developer one day myself. And to read the updates on the building of Ion Storm was like the nerd equivalent of a Shonda Rhimes show. I'm actually kind of convinced that Shonda Rhimes would look at this and go, that's too much drama even for me. John Romero's very public split from id after grumblings and headbutting with John Carmack over the development of Quake, the very public announcements of Ion Storm forming together, much like Image Comics had done in the funny book industry. A group of creators fed up with the stifling constraints of their environments, now bound together to craft a studio where, and I quote, design is law. Pictures of the big three dominated PC gaming news. Romero had earned his rockstar status by creating fucking Doom and Quake. His ego and hunger to create even bigger games inflated to nonsensical degrees. But John Romero, despite the facade and the legend, is a human being. He felt burnt by the dev cycle on Quake, on being berated for not working hard enough, and then being fired after turning around and practically killing himself during the final 7 months of production. His ideas for Quake had been huge, a product of his love for Dungeons & Dragons, a campaign crafted to let the player become the ultimate warrior, powered by the gods, an unstoppable force unlike any other. Romero, at that point, was consciously living the rockstar lifestyle, with his impossibly gorgeous mane of hair, and his appearances in gaming ads, and his sports car, and his stunningly beautiful girlfriends. Talent breeds confidence, and at the point in time when Romero left id, his confidence was at an apex. Now, in my Quake 2 video, I called John Carmack an immovable object, and Romero an unstoppable force. Carmack wanted to play it safe and make the same games over and over while pushing the technology forward, while Romero wanted to innovate in ways that no one had ever seen or played before. But with the founding of Ion Storm, Romero's unstoppable force was no longer being held in check by the immovable object, and while Carmack produced the bland and boring Quake 2, Romero's contribution to the Ion Storm stable was the legendarily chaotic Daikatana. If I've given you the impression that the hype surrounding the forming of Ion Storm was something, the hype around Daikatana was something else entirely. Carmack is in many ways the PC gaming version of George Lucas, and to that extent, Romero is PC gaming's Michael Bay. And the tragedy in that is that Bay is known these days primarily for giant racist robots and being misogynistic while exploding literally everything in sight, whether practically or otherwise. But Bay started out with genre-changing action flicks like Bad Boys and The Rock and Armageddon. Then he tried to make a serious picture with Pearl Harbor, and things started to take a negative turn. And in the past 20 years since Pearl Harbor, Bay has directed 4 original films and 5 Transformers movies. Stick with what works, I guess, and here's the thing of it, kids, both The Rock and Armageddon are in the Criterion Collection, which is a collection of films restored by the Criterion Company in order to preserve them for their important contributions for film. 2 of Michael Bay's films are in the goddamn Criterion Collection. Yeah, we all know that he explodes things and puts seriously questionable content into his films, but the man began as a serious filmmaker and artist, one who's classically trained, and there is considerable talent behind that lens. Romero has a far less problematic reputation in the wake of his creations. In fact, he's generally regarded as a really nice guy who takes the time to interact with fans and peers alike on Twitter and Twitch. But in much the same way, Romero proved over and over that his talent was not without the praise it garnered, and that he was no fluke, nor some golden boy without reason. Unfortunately, much like Bay, Romero succumbed to the hype machine and the allure of excess without slowing down to think about how to proceed. There's this little ad, and if you're a Romero fan, or a first-person shooter fan, or hell, a PC gamer fan, you know the ad I'm talking about. And it ran in magazines around holiday 1997 that established that Daikatana would be either a complete failure or the biggest thing since God. See, Romero was the king of trash talk in deathmatch circuits, and Mike Wilson at Ion Storm wanted to capitalize on that. He produced an ad for Daikatana along those lines, which Romero thought was funny, but he was hesitant to use it as an advertisement for his game, because it felt like it was hyping Romero more than it was hyping the game. Wilson told him, quote, "Don't be a pussy." And so Romero approved the ad. I remember the first time I saw this ad and how absolutely felt like I was being told 2 things. 1, this game was going to wreck me. 2, Ion Storm didn't give no shits about no one and they did what they wanted. I'm 15 years old at the time, reading this ad, and I'm blown away by it because I'd never seen anyone get away with this kind of brazen advertising ever, at least not in video gaming. And I never would again because literally no one else thought that ad was funny. For every person who read that and thought, "My God, he's coming for us all," 5 more sat back and crossed their arms and thought, "You can't make me your bitch." One little ad, on top of the mountains of hype and years behind the scenes mayhem, cemented Daikatana's fate before it even released. And to top it all off, this ad ran in holiday 1997, and Daikatana didn't release until May 2000. Look, I'm not here to be a historian or a documentarian, so I'm not going to get into every single little detail about the trials and tribulations of the behind-the-scenes of Daikatana. Romero switched engines partway through and lost 11 months of development. People quit, new people were hired, and then those people quit. Spending was wildly over budget. The Daikatana demo at E3 1998 was completely broken, etc., etc. I'm just here to tell you what I remember about all of that, so you understand a few things going into this review. One of the things you need to know is that the hype was so massive that it flipped around on itself and became negative. Perhaps if that wall of epic buildup hadn't been so high, or perhaps if Romero's rockstar status had been a little less indulgent, perhaps Daikatana might have gotten a better rep after release, because the game that was released was savaged by critics and fans alike. The game was buggy, broken, hard to play, insanely difficult, and awful in the beginning. Immediately after release, the game was patched to version 1.2, but by the time the patch was put out, the damage had been done. Everyone was under the impression that this was an absolute failure. The proof in the pudding that Carmack keeping Romero in check was the reason for Romero's success. Eidos Software published the game. Heck, they pretty much saved the game from being lost, and they predicted the game needed to sell 2.5 million copies in order to be profitable. After releasing in May, by September, Daikatana had only moved around 45,000 units. One of the biggest flops in gaming history. Probably the closest modern equivalent to the Daikatana saga is Cyberpunk 2077, but Cyberpunk had already recouped costs thanks to pre-orders and day one sales, despite the trash state of the game on release. Cyberpunk 2077 is still being worked on and fixed right now because the money was in the bank and the interest was there, and it exists in the state of games as a live service. Had Daikatana been able to do the same, it might have had a different outcome. Alright, Ranger, you say. So if this game is as bad as it seems, then why are we talking about it? First of all, sit up and drink some water because you're dehydrated. Second, because this is history we're talking about. Much like John Romero himself, legends are rarely portrayed in truthful detail. Romero may have acted like a rock star, his ego may have been inflated, but he was and is still a human being with a great deal of talent who still deserves the respect of the gaming community. Daikatana, for all the negative criticism, is still just a game that released in a broken state, and with the right amount of care, could even be playable. In 2016, a group of dedicated fans made a fan patch for Daikatana, version 1.3, and it improved the experience significantly. No longer is it the absurdly buggy game that released over 20 years ago, although some bugs still, in fact, run rampant through the game. And after playing Quake, and then Quake 2, I realized that Daikatana, for the first time in my own memory, was a potentially playable experience for me. So I went to Steam, bought the game, downloaded the 1.3 patch, and loaded it up. Kids, this is Daikatana. Oh, yes. Oh, this is tickling my buttons, kids. I've got a soft spot for late 90s, early 2000s gaming with their hyper-detailed textures and colored lighting and edgy artwork, and this speaks to the bountiful excesses of that time. This is a mess. This is a glorious, beautiful mess, and I am so very happy with this. Oh, man. Now, one of the things version 1.3 does is that it allows you to bypass two things that were a part of the initial release of the game: the AI sidekicks and the save system. The game's save system was oddly built around finding save gems throughout the game instead of being able to save whenever you wanted. If you don't have a gem, you can't save. And on top of that, you can only carry up to 3 at a time. Also, the AI sidekicks famously can get lost or stuck in the environments, and if you don't take them to the end of the level with you, you can't exit the level. Hell, you can't even cross into the next part of the map if they're not with you. But I want to experience this as close to the original experience as possible, so I'm going to use the initial save system and keep the sidekicks. I'm also up for the best challenge possible, so we're going to go in on Shogun difficulty. Alright, so the game opens up in Tokyo, the year 2455. We get to meet our protagonist, Hiro Miyamoto, as he's greeted by an old man at the door of his dojo. The Blade Runner Japanese cyberpunk aesthetic is really neat. I'm digging the setting here, but the cutscene...
I am not here on Mishima's behalf. My name is Toshiro Ebihara.
You want to learn to sword fight? Great. You're a bit older than my usual clientele, but it's never too late to.
No, no, please, you misunderstand.
Look, if you're asking for some donation...
Perhaps, if you would allow me to explain, Miyamoto-san, you need only...
The cutscene is...
a few moments.
Go on.
Not here. They may be watching. Centuries ago, the shogunate Mishima ruled over our people with an iron fist and a bloody sword. Their only opposition...
This is an 11-minute cutscene.
...clan, a group of warriors dedicated to overthrowing the brutal regime. For years, the Mishimas...
So, long story short, the old man is Ebihara, the father of a woman named Mikiko Ebihara, and they are the descendants of a Japanese clan who once used the Daikatana thousands of years ago to depose an evil shogun. Hiro is the descendant of the man who created the Daikatana, and understood that it was too powerful for evil men to wield, so he destroyed it. Except somehow it survived at the bottom of a volcano, indestructible. And then Mishima, the descendant of the evil shogun, got a hold of the sword and used its time-bending powers to go back in time to establish himself a corporate empire. Apparently, Mikiko tried to steal the sword, but got captured in the process. So, now we need to free Mikiko and get a hold of the Daikatana to use its power to set the timeline correct. All we need to do is get into Mishima's fortress somehow and...
No! You are the descendant of Usagi Miyamoto! Embrace your heritage and...
Who the...
Holy shit, that old man just got wrecked!
When the death collectors come to get my body, steal away inside the coffin. It will get you inside Mishima's fortress.
What the fuck, dude? Buy me a drink or something first. Needless to say, despite the gravity here, this sets up some serious stakes. Legendary swords? Check. Altered timeline? Check. Okay, so let's start up the game and...
bump ahead. Odds or evener?
Evener.
How many we lose? Only 4 this time. Looks like my rock calling out. Too bad for you. Damn.
Okay, moving past the incredibly offensive stereotypical voice acting, here we are in the swamps outside Mishima's fortress. We just hitched a ride inside an old man's coffin, got dropped with some dead bodies, so let's grab this ion blaster and... Wow, okay, yeah, so let's try this again and... Here, let me just go over and do this real quick. I don't think I can overstate how rough of an introduction this is to the game. The green aesthetic has been made fun of to death and back, the terrible choice of robot frogs and mosquitoes as your initial enemies, which leads to robot alligators and turrets as well, the initial ion blaster weapon, which causes damage to you if you use it in water. This is a steep learning curve, especially if you think you can struggle bus on Shogun. Do not, and I repeat, do not play this on Shogun if it's your first time. There's less ammo, extra turrets to face, and enemies do even more crazy amounts of damage. Meanwhile, the frogs spit poison which does damage over time, but will wear off. The mosquitoes are small and difficult to hit, and usually come at you in swarms. The alligators are decent enough obstacles, no complaints there, and the turrets can be taken out by shooting a nearby power grid. Health comes in small packs, or small berries you can eat off of bushes. And despite being only able to carry 3 save gems at a time, the game autosaves every time you cross the threshold into the next part of the map, which definitely helps in getting through the game. But oh, you are squishy. Fucking everything in these first few levels can and will jib you faster than you think it can. Sized be damned. Getting bum rushed by a couple of frogs on the ground and mosquitoes in the air at the same time is a continual possibility, which forces you to think about where you need to look and dance at any given time. And, okay, I know I'm weird, but stay with me here. But despite being green and grungy and ugly, this game is already very pretty. Lighting effects, texture details, environmental design. This statement is going to pay off later, believe you me. But for now, if all you see is green and gross and don't like it, just take my word for it. After being forced into a battle with the game's first boss, an oversized mosquito queen surrounded by a swarm of war mosquitoes, I started to learn about the importance of strategic saving. If the game gives you a save gem and you have more than one, use it immediately. As I went through, I found myself begging for a map change in order to maintain a sense of progress. Daikatana is not an easy game, at least not yet. So death is around every corner, and if you've pushed through some seriously tough enemies only to get ganked last second by something small that you didn't see coming, you're going to experience some frustration as you're loaded back to the closest or most recent save point. This happened frequently throughout the game, and was the cause of probably my biggest frustrations, but to be fair, it happened the most in the opening stages. Moving forward, the game gets curiously intuitive about navigating environments. Look for doors, look for power grids, shoot the grids to open doors, keep your ears open for the sound of mosquitoes. The first humans you encounter aren't even offensive enemies, they're just Mishima workers who you can kill if you feel like it, but since they don't attack you, it really isn't necessary. Unless they're standing in the way of where you need to go, in which case I maybe turned a few of them into jam. So, I'm not much of a secret hunter in games. I feel pretty accomplished when I find them, sure, but I don't go out of my way to do so. Daikatana, however, presents some fun rewards if you go off the beaten path, swimming down holes or finding crevices you can crawl through. I managed to find an area where a copy of the Mosquito Queen boss was hanging out alongside another swarm of mosquitoes, but it net me a super health, aka the Golden Soul, and some decent armor as well as a save gem and a C4 launcher before depositing me back onto the main path. That was the first moment I said out loud, "That was cool." I genuinely meant it. The maps crisscross back and forth on each other in really interesting ways at times. Not always successfully, but when it works, it really shows off Romero's design skills. We get a little cutscene in which Hiro's ancestor Usagi shows up as a ghost and opens the path for Hiro to proceed forward. Although, in retrospect, I think he might not have been a ghost, but that's something to talk about once we get to the end of the game. Once we're out of the swamp, things actually start to get a lot better pretty quickly. Granted, we just entered a sewer system, and we're still primarily facing off against frogs and mosquitoes, but fairly soon the two primary enemies become heavy robots and a variety of drones, and guards with pistols. Once the robots enter the scene, we need to get the C4 launcher in use. It's not great, although sometimes it is. Blast radius is just absolutely ridiculous, to the point where trying to utilize this goddamn thing effectively is more costly on Hiro's health than it is on enemies. It can be utilized to set up traps, as C4 shots will either A, explode on contact with enemies, or B, become motion activated where they land if there's no one in the immediate vicinity. It took a lot of trial and error with this thing to really get it down, and most of my frustration with this part of the game came from not being able to gauge the explosions properly, and then exploding myself in the process. The robots take an absurd number of ion blasts to kill, or a couple of C4 shots. So which is easier to do? That depends on your patience and, frankly, your luck. There's also a chainsaw glove hand weapon thing that you find. It's complete garbage, and keeps making the same short repeating leaf blower engine noise, and is only useful on frogs underwater, which means it's basically useless. Right about here seems like a good time to mention the RPG aspects of the game. In the HUD, you have a little bar that shows how much experience you've gained from fragging enemies and how close you are to a level up. Get a level up, and you can boost Hiro's attack strength, fire rate, jump height, run speed, or maximum health. At the beginning of the game, Hiro is a measly level 1. Health caps at 100 hit points, attack and power are at their weakest and slowest, and jumping is basic bitch jump height. But what's interesting about level ups is that even one boost to any of these stats improves things significantly. Boost health and you get 50 extra points of maximum health points. Power goes up by 1 and suddenly your weapons feel a lot beefier than they did a few minutes prior. Now the game itself doesn't give you much information in-game about the level system. That's in the manual, but anyone with half an ounce of experience in RPG stats will figure things out pretty quickly. And the immediate results when you choose a stat to upgrade is satisfying to say the least. It definitely had me thinking ahead to which stats I wanted to boost and when. Have I mentioned how fucking pretty this game is? Mercilessly gritty and grimy and textured and detailed? It's just so fucking cool. I was continually engaged by the aesthetic of the episode, if not the action, where you can turn a corner and get fucked over by half a dozen guard bots out of nowhere. That, or get ganked by your own C4 because you stood too close to literally anything while you fired it. But the general feel, the visuals, the personality and the weapons, the enemies, I'm honestly having some fun here. Hiro gets out of the sewers and discovers that Mishima Fortress is actually a massive prison, and action starts to get interesting. It's a welcome switch up from the sewers and feels a lot less cheap. No more wondering if you're going to hear the sound of buzzing to warn you that a swarm of idiot mosquito bots are trying to suck your blood. We also get introduced to neat health stations called hospitals, and I really hope it was Romero who came up with that name because I want to hug him for it. The prison is a series of twisty navigation and unlocking various paths, either through computer terminals or by breaking holes in walls. It's mostly straightforward with a few head-scratching moments, but I mostly was more concerned with the repetitive sound bites coming from the guards and the clanking sound of the bots. This is something that will pop up later in the game, so remember I said this, but the guards seem to be repeating the same line over and over again. For some reason, they all sound like Patton Oswalt. Hey, look at this, a shotgun! The shot cycler. This bad boy is best used specifically on big enemies that require a couple of shots to put down instead of on the smaller guards, because the damn thing fires 6 shotgun shells in a row. No other option, just 6 shells, one right after the other until your clip is empty, and Hiro loads another rack. When it hits hard, taking out robot drones in 1 or 2 rounds of shells, and the double barrel design is absolutely sick. I honestly wanted to like and use this weapon more than I did, because I'm a sucker for a good shotgun, but for the most part it felt like it forced me to stand still for too long to make sure every shell hit the target. Standing still in this game will get you killed faster than anything, so stick to the ion blaster for the most part, unless you have a wide target. And now, kids, the time has come in the video for me to introduce to you one of the greatest characters in PC gaming ever created. You know the name, but it's time to know the man. Here at the top of the prison, we meet the one, the only, motherfucking Superfly Johnson!
Superfly! Bad motherfucker!
Look, you kids can giggle and smirk all you want at Superfly's name, but John Romero knew what the fuck he was doing with this one. Superfly comes off as an homage to the blaxploitation heroes of 70s cinema, and he stands tall amongst a sea of serious silliness. The man has presence and personality, which shines through in a series of quips and one-liners that he speaks throughout the game. Sometimes in fairly badass ways, sometimes in ways that make you question who wrote this shit. A lot of the dialogue, whether in cutscene or randomly spoken, is 100% pure garbage. Sure, at the end of the day, Daikatana's writing is sci-fi movie of the week, B-movie bubblegum, but this game takes it seriously, just as serious as Superfly Johnson. I mean, shit, the man is strapped to a torture machine asking Hiro to let him out, and then when Hiro offers to let him out, but in exchange for information, Superfly says,
Speak.
Superfly Johnson is stone fucking cold. I saw him jib a guard with 2 punches.
How does that feel?
Somebody call for backup!
I wouldn't fuck with that, and neither should you. Hiro gets Superfly out of the torture machine, and the two of them head in search of Ebihara's daughter Makiko, who Mishima has captured if you've already forgotten that plot point. Having Superfly on hand makes the going a little bit easier, as he'll charge into the fray and start whooping ass while you do the same thing, taking down enemies twice as fast. Now on normal difficulty, AI characters are apparently invulnerable, which meant I didn't have to worry about him dying. Only myself, which kept happening a little too frequently. Superfly lets us know that Mishima is up to human experimentation, something he knows because he used to be the chief of security for Mishima until he spoke up against the experiments. Then he got a death sentence for insubordination. Well, pretty harsh. But now we're on our way through the crematorium, which starts out by playing an insanely cool funeral organ version of the Doom theme at Doom's Gate while you're standing in the main parlor. I was dumbfounded once I recognized the track, and I giggled like an idiot for a few solid minutes. Speaking of music, the soundtrack for the game is better than I expected. It's a little hard to track down for sure who did the composing, as there are 5 names attached to the score, depending on your source. But Will LeConto and Robert Owens are the 2 primary names responsible for the music. For those of you who played futuristic sci-fi video games of the 2000s, you'll already know what you're in for. Low-key techno house music that's just forward-thinking enough to count as music from the future, like something you would hear in a Matrix flick. Episode 1's soundtrack is honestly pretty good, nothing to write home about, but it kept me nodding my head while I struggled through. Oh, also thank God I got the Sidewinder. Easily the best weapon in the Future Japan episode. The Sidewinder is a blissfully simple rocket launcher that fires twin rockets that spiral around each other and do maximum damage. The C4 launcher becomes obsolete the moment you get this. There's also another weapon in this episode, the ultimate weapon of the group, but once you have the Sidewinder, you'll be rotating between that and the Ion Blaster, with the Shot Cycler for good measure every here and there. Future Japan's weapons are all fairly good times, a trend you'll see here throughout the game. 1 or 2 weapons will be just fine to use, maybe 1 will be trash, and the rest will be solid enough to keep you alive throughout the course of the episode. For a game that has 4 unique episodes, with 6 unique weapons per episode, that's not a bad return. Sure, there's something to be said for quality over quantity, but as we'll soon see, the changes between episodes help breathe new life into the game with each new experience. Pretty soon, we're in a processing center where we run into, robot rats with rocket launchers. And we discover that Mishima's using the remains of the human bodies he's been experimenting on and grinding them into meat for the McMishima burgers that the populace loves. Yes, you heard that right. McMishima burgers are people. I'm not going to make a Szechuan sauce joke because that's Chinese culture, and this is Japan, and unlike someone, I can be sensitive to Asian cultures.
Odds or even.
Mikiko is located in cold storage, and...
I just thought of something cool, hero. Let's go look for some pizza!
Dude, Superfly. No, not right now. No. Cold storage features deep cryo fluids below the walkways that you absolutely cannot touch or you die instantly, plus new guards that spray cryo fluid at you. There's some fun environmental puzzles to figure out. Plus, I got to take advantage of the Ion Blaster's ability to bounce off of walls and nailed some cryo scientists from around the corner. You know what, I'm honestly starting to have fun with this game. So far, directing Superfly hasn't been too bad. He's only gotten stuck or lost once or twice. I'm still dying a lot because I keep rounding corners and taking way too much damage from rocket blast radius or just enemies in general. But this isn't bad, necessarily. This is a little frustrating in places, but it's not bad. After freeing Makiko, the game hit a bug and didn't load a cutscene between levels, though. I tried reloading a save so I could go back and trigger the cutscene, but unfortunately, the glitch happened again. Apparently, depending on how you enter certain areas, you can accidentally skip cutscenes. It only happened twice that I know of, and the second time I'm only partially sure of. Directing 2 companions now is where a little extra frustration piles on. Getting around with Superfly was easily done. He just followed me and I made sure he was following. Moving around with both him and Makiko is tempestuous because they can get in each other's way. And they're both trying to follow me, but if they can't fit on the same walkway at the same time, you gotta wait. Or if you activated a lift and they both weren't on there, you have to send the lift back down and wait for one of them to come up. So far, nothing super aggravating, but I'm starting to understand the complaints about the companions. The vault that contains the Daikatana is full of elevator puzzles in areas where Hero needs to move solo without the companions, which the game kindly lets you know that they'll wait for you sometimes.
I'm gonna try and fix this access computer.
And you proceed to pathfind until you figure out how to get them both through the next door, and then there's platforming puzzles and... Okay, it's not going to be much longer. It can't be. The Daikatana is just around the corner. I'm almost through this episode. It's just Yes, the frustration is mounting. Lack of saving wherever I want, not knowing when to use a save gem because who knows how long it'll be before another one pops up. Frequent deaths to the overpowered enemies and oversized blast radii is starting to become a huge fucking pain. I said a minute ago that I was enjoying this, and I still am. I'm thoroughly engaged, but my patience is starting to wear a little thin. Okay, I'm here at the Daikatana. Now all I have to do is... You're so fucking lucky that I love you. Okay, this part is stupid. The floor electrocutes whenever the electrodes touch the floor, and you need to blast out the pipes connected to the chamber holding the sword. Do that in these weird brain things with eyes floating in jars appear, including one guarded by turrets. Clear them out, and then... What the fuck even is this? Okay, so pipes, brain stems, mutant terror beasts, and then...
The Daikatana.
What the?
It's Mishima. And he's got another Daikatana.
But that's not possible.
Oh, but it is, my dear. Just one of those conundrums that crop up when dealing with time travel and alternate timelines. You see, I was visiting the year 2030 when I sensed a disturbance in the time continuum. I realize now that what I felt was the taint of your touch on the Daikatana, sending ripples through the time stream. Fortunately for me, your presence here is merely a nuisance, and one that I can quickly dispose of at that.
Hollow words, Butcher. Your reign of terror is coming to an end.
Careful, hero. I wouldn't come any closer if I were you. These two swords are actually one and the same. If they were ever to cross or touch in any way, the world as we know it would cease to exist, and we would all be destroyed. Do you dare risk that?
You can't hide behind cheap parlor tricks forever, you coward. Why don't you face me on equal terms? Then we'll see who's the better sword master.
Naturally, your ancestry allows you to wield the Daikatana better than any man alive. Yet still, you cannot harness its true power. As I can, and with that power, I will banish the three of you to the ends of the earth and leave you at the mercy of the ultimate prison. Time.
Okay, but I need to talk about the camera work on these cutscenes. They swoop and fly and hardly ever focus on what they're supposed to be focusing on, bobbing and weaving like a first-year director of photography on an experimental avant-garde film. It screams 2000s cool, and it's stupid, and I hate it, and I love it. But with that, we've left behind 25th century Japan. Mishima has banished us to somewhere in time, so let's see what happens to the team.
Son of a gun! He did it! He really did it! He actually sent us back in time! Superfly? Mikiko? Great. Just great. For all I know, Mishima could have stranded us in different timelines. Looks like I'm on my own.
Wait, what the fuck is this? What the fuck is this? What the fuck is this? Episode 2 of the game takes place in ancient Greece. Not the historically accurate Greece, but the Ray Harryhausen ancient Greece full of skeleton warriors and giant spiders and harpies and other mythological creatures. You start out with just the Daikatana. But you'll pick up a discus that bounces around like Captain America's shield. You could even pick up multiple so you could throw more than one at once. You also get a staff with 2 living serpents on it that shoots poison barbs. Also the trident of fucking Poseidon. Holy shit, this is a wild sea change. Those first 2 weapons I mentioned also have a secondary attack, where they change to melee if you're at point blank range, slicing and or biting at enemies directly in front of you. From the moment this episode begins to the moment it ends, the aesthetic of epic adventure is in high gear, washing away the bitter aftertaste of 25th century Mishima Japan like the perfect palate cleanser. Swordplay is fun, the Grecian weapons are super neat and distinctly unique. Even the pickups have changed. Greek-themed armor, jars of life water, and instead of hoss portals, there are fountains to drink from and replenish health. The music switches into proper heroic Odyssey soundtrack with horns and Baldur's Gate vibes. To say that I was fucking blown away by the difference this single episode made on my experience is an understatement. While the game certainly doesn't get easier by any stretch, it becomes much more manageable in terms of navigating and combat, so that the frustration of reloading due to cheap deaths is severely reduced. Each time period has their own unique health packs and armor pickups and replenishments, and discovering the differences in the time change, understanding how things work here in the past, is half the fun of the experience. But whether or not it's worth sludging through the first episode of the game remains to be seen. Since we have the Daikatana, it's time to talk about the sword itself can be leveled up. Use the sword to absorb XP earned from killing enemies, but the downside is that Hero doesn't get any XP earned from combat while using the Daikatana. It's a bit of a trade-off, as you'll have to switch between the sword and your other weapons to balance out your gains in order to keep Hero's levels moving forward. But it also enhances the power of the Daikatana. Now, if you press the tab key, you'll see how much progress you've made towards leveling up the sword. It's super handy. It kills things real fast, and the more power it gains, the quicker the kills come. Alright, so off the bat, we have some solo adventuring to do, as Superfly and Mikiko are nowhere to be found. Which is fine, it's a nice change of pace from where we just were. No companions to order around, just some simple pathfinding, some satisfying combat. With this change-up comes the impressive feeling of being lost in what seems like somewhat familiar settings, a human out of time. After finding the horn of Karen, Hero makes a friend. God, this camera work is majestic.
Hello there. I'm looking for some friends of mine. Perhaps you've seen them. You probably can't even understand me, can you? I need to get to the other side of the river. Can you help me?
Drachma.
Drachma, eh? I'm Hero.
Charun. Drachma.
Huh?
Drachma.
Oh, I get it. Drachma's your local currency. You want money to take me across.
Drachma.
Drachma. Right. I'll be back.
The writing on this game is solid fucking gold. After a little footwork, we find the drachma and take it back to Karen, and we're through the first area of the Greece episode. I am thoroughly exhausted and impressed with how wide and tall and expansive this entire episode is. After the tension and claustrophobia of the Mishima Towers, this is literally a breath of fresh air. Like the feeling of going to work for a long-ass 6 to midnight closing shift, slinging drinks left and right, handling the local drunks while schmoozing the bar patrons, collecting tips and avoiding sexual harassment, and running dishes until that sweet, sweet moment that you get to shout, "Last call," and everyone comes up for one more drink, and you turn half of them away because they're cut off, and soon after you're kicking them out of the building because it's closing time. Don't know where you're going, but you can't stay here, and you wrap up the closing tasks, and then, at long last, you sit down for a shift beer, and it's just... perfect. By this point, Hero is level 5, and the difference in power and health is night and day from where I started. Sure, there's still some small, skittering enemies like the baby spiders, but they make sense because there are giant mama spiders who keep birthing them, and also there's, holy shit, a fucking griffin! None of the enemies here give you too much trouble on their own if you're smart about it. Don't try tackling griffins with the Daikatana. Stay ranged for them. It's doable, but you're risking some HP in the quest for that sword XP. Options get easier once you pick up the Venomous, the twin serpent staff that does poison and melee damage. Sometimes the poison barbs will linger on the ground for a minute if they don't hit anything, and if you're stupid like me, you'll walk over them and do poison damage to yourself. Thank fuck the poison status doesn't last long in this game. The catacombs are dark, creepy, and twisty, and fun to explore, at least until Hero is a dumbass and gets himself stuck in a trap so Makiko can rescue him.
Man, that was stupid.
Hiro, is that you?
Makiko. Oh, glad to see you're all right. Mind giving me a hand?
No problem. Hang on. Got it.
Much appreciated. Any sign of Superfly?
I haven't seen him. He could be anywhere. I say we forget about him and move on.
Wow, Makiko's kind of a bitch.
We're not leaving without him.
How altruistic of you. Do I need to remind you of what's at stake here? We can't waste our time looking for some has-been thug.
I can't believe you're being so cavalier about a guy who risked his own skin to rescue you from Kage's clutches.
Don't get self-righteous on me. I'm just being practical. Chances are, this Johnson fella will end up stabbing us in the back somewhere down the pike. Besides which, he's probably outlived his usefulness to us anyway.
I disagree. I think you're underestimating him. For all we know, Superfly may very well turn out to be the one to tip the scales in our favor next time we face Mishima.
I seriously doubt that, but we'll play it your way, for now.
Glad we got that settled. Now come on. Let's go find you a weapon. I'm sure we'll be needing more than the Daikatana to get us out of this mess.
She's really not my favorite to run around with, as her voice gets really grating with some of the line delivery she's got. I'm sure it's not really the actress behind the voice work's fault. She was probably directed that way, but whoo, listening to some of her lines is... oh, it's like scraping fingernails on ice. You know that sensation that screams up and down your spine when you feel that all over your body? Yeah, that's just Makiko. I miss my buddy Superfly.
Superfly!
Could you come up here a sec?
Talk about cutting it close. Let's not do that again, okay?
Agreed.
I wonder where we are.
Only one way to find out.
Ooh, well, that seems like another cutscene skip. Oh, right, this guy.
What is it, Hiro? What's wrong?
Did you see that?
See what? What are you talking about?
Never mind.
I still have some theories about this guy. Just you wait, we'll catch up with that soon. Alright, so honestly, the biggest knock I can make on this episode is that it just feels a little too easy, too gentle, particularly coming off the wild ride of difficulty spikes in the previous episode. that's not really this episode's fault. If anything, this feels like it was supposed to be the proper intro to the game as a whole. The gentle learning curve, the easy navigation, simplistic environmental puzzles, even the intuitive nature of the weapons feels like this is where the game was intended to open up. Maybe the whole point of the Japan episode was like in some of those RPGs where you're tossed headfirst into a battle that you can't possibly win in order to set the stage and the stakes for you to level up towards. A boss fight in an army of such magnitude that you, the lowly level 1 warrior, cannot comprehend conquering at this stage in your journey. So then the game dumps you into the fluffier parts of the game so that you can work on building up some experience, you cute little thing, you. And if so, it almost works. Almost. But it fails overall because the first episode of the game is just so long, ultimately more tedious than it needs to be due to the area of effect weaponry and legions of enemies that react quicker than you can the moment you step in the room. If the first episode's difficulty and weapons had been tweaked a little bit, fuck it, leave in the frogs and the mosquitoes, just dial back some of the exuberance of getting your ass handed to you. Then I think the initial introduction to the game would be less harsh and inspire less bitter tastes in gamers' mouths. Because episode 2 might be light on difficulty by comparison, but it's just stupid fun. Running around, slicing and dicing skeleton warriors and odd weird troll things and Athenian warriors, also fucking minotaurs. You're like a warrior out of time. This is great stuff. Oh man, and the hammer of Hades. That's a fun weapon. It's basically the Grecian shotgun. It's so heavy that it takes Hero a moment to lift it and bring it back down upon his foes. But if you hold down the fire button, he'll lift it up higher to bring it down even harder. It is a great risk versus reward system, as you have to time how long it takes for you to heave the damn thing upwards before one of the mostly melee enemies in the area gets within striking range. And the doubly cool thing about it is that if you hold it down long enough, the hammer will cause a shockwave that'll pretty much one-shot anything in a certain radius. And despite doing damage to yourself as well, it's a fantastic attack when you're surrounded, and the only way to take out some of the living statue enemies as well. Epic is exactly the word to use for this fucking thing, because you literally feel like you're out of some Homerian epic tale of gods and monsters swinging that son of a bitch around. This is where I started to finally infer what John Romero no doubt had intended for this game to be. Less of a fast-paced boomer shooter like Quake, but more of a sprawling epic along the lines of Heretic or Hexen. Some of these areas are huge, literally and figuratively, wide open and expansive, requiring investigation to discover pathways and switches and items to uncover, including quite a bit of running back and forth across the hubs and map changes in order to get around obstacles and discover switches, which I really gotta admit I was unprepared for. I'm a big fan of Hexen, a game which I know Romero had his hands in, even though Raven Software developed it, and Daikatana feels far more like an RPG shooter of that nature than it ever feels like an id Software shooter. Meanwhile, Mikiko finally starts to get sus vibes from Hero.
So, what happened back there? You looked awfully spooked.
I saw something. Some sort of apparition.
You mean a ghost?
I'm not sure. Could have been. All I know is that the last time I saw it, it helped me get inside of Mishima's fortress. And now I just saw it again.
The spirit of Usagi.
You've seen it too?
No, but my father did, on more than one occasion. He claimed that Usagi was the one who warned him that history had been altered by Mishima.
Interesting.
God, I can't believe they actually trademarked that line, let alone used it literally in-game. Poseidon's spear shows up at last, a baller weapon. It fires 3 water-based energy projectiles at once, and it has a splash effect, so don't use it at point-blank range. At first I thought I needed to save my ammo because an unseen godly voice told me to use it against the Guardian Cerberus. But there's trident tips all over the place in the form of statues of Poseidon himself. Between this and the hammer, you're virtually unstoppable at this point in the episode. And with the Daikatana inching towards level 3 from use, I felt pretty goddamn good about my ability to handle anything coming at me. Of course, I had a couple of times where I got overconfident, like walking onto a balcony with 2 living statues and little health to try for a full force hammer attack. Plus, the fucking doors will do crushing damage if you stand in their way at all. Yeah, the number of times I died because I was standing in a doorway, shooting at an enemy, and the door decided to close on me was bullshit. Biggest, honest, most definite bullshit of the entire game here is the fact that the doors cause damage if they close on you. Should not be a thing in the slightest, in this game or in any game. Jibbed. I got jibbed by doors. Before we get to Cerberus, there's 5 pieces of the Aegis key that we're looking for along the way. Each piece a single letter of the word Aegis. I was prepared for a long hunt to find each one, but somehow by some weird design magic, I found each one without having to really look for them at all. They were each placed along the general path I was taking through the level anyway, which was a very pleasant surprise, and actually made it hard to not find them.
We've come too far to give up now. There must be some way to open these gates.
Alpha, Epsilon, Gamma, Iota, Sigma. That's odd. The tablets spell out the word Aegis.
What's that?
It means shield in Greek. I wonder if it's some sort of warning.
Now time for a little criticism. Up till now, everything's been pretty decent in terms of combat against enemies, but we're about to fight Cerberus, the so-called guardian of the gate we can't get past. So around the corner and through a tunnel, we discover the adorable little 3-headed mini-boss. And I'm thinking I want to sink some serious XP into the Daikatana. So I go in sword first to kill the bastard. Except Cerberus is ready for me and comes charging like a ton of bricks and murders me without a second thought. Alright, I remember that Poseidon told me to use the trident on Cerberus. So I, on my second try, waltzed down the same tunnel and beat that damn dog in seconds as though it were no big deal. At first, the boss seems like it's going to be a tough fucker to deal with, but once you figure out the right weapon to use, it'll go down almost instantaneously. Every boss in this goddamn game is exactly the same way. You walk in unaware at first, you get ganked, and then you go in on a second try with a different outlook and a bigger weapon, and next thing you know, you fucking slaughtered them. Even the end game boss, I'll show you that later, mark my words. Even the end game boss is an absolute joke of a fight once you whip out the right weapon and mow them down. It's ridiculous. I kind of feel like Romero caught a little too much of the id Software terrible boss curse here, presenting what ought to be an epic duel, but instead turns out to be a wrestling match up against a limp noodle. But we don't have time to dwell on that for now, because Makiko is about to have a revelation.
Wonder who she is. Looks like some sort of goddess.
I think it's supposed to be Athena. Amazing how lifelike she looks. Almost as if she'd been frozen in place.
Oh God, I think I know what that shield was warning us about.
What?
We have to get out of here.
Why? What is it?
Didn't Perseus use a mirrored shield to defeat the Gorgons? This must be one of the lairs of Medusa, the witch.
Who turned her enemies to stone. Let's keep moving.
You heard that correctly, kids. We've got a Medusa to deal with here, which also explains the living statue enemies we've dealt with. One nice little touch leading up to this moment is that all the skeleton warriors we've dealt with all have Medusa faces on their shields, something I didn't notice until running through footage to edit for this video. Points to Romero for the little details. Oh, but let's get one more epic weapon just for shits and giggles. The Eye of Zeus. It's essentially a lightning gun and a BFG all in one. The voice from above tells me to wield the eye against the treacherous Medusa, and after the Cerberus fight, I'm definitely paying attention to what I ought to be wielding against what. Medusa's lair is a fun little area to navigate. Nice and twisty and chock full of monsters to frag. One section involves taking a dive into a fountain of poison to follow where it's pouring from. But you have to down the poison antidote first before you do. You'll only have a limited time before the antidote wears off while you're swimming, which adds some tension to the proceedings. The timer didn't feel unfair either. It was obviously limited supply, and more bottles along the way at least gave me the visual cue that I was going to need more than just the one dose. Here's something that I haven't mentioned before, and for kind of a good reason. Scattered about the game are status booster pickups, which boost a particular stat up to max level for a limited time. So say you pick up the attack booster like I did in the Medusa layer. Your attack being at maximum value means you attack at a super fast rate until it wears off, which is pretty cool, especially when you pick up a power booster and all of your shots do maximum damage value. But the boosters last for only so long and for so short a time that I oftentimes found myself scrambling to find enemies nearby to use them on, and it would usually wear off before I could actually take advantage of the effects. Okay, I know she's shouting skull cracking time, but every single time she says it, I swear to God, I hear skull fucking time. And it drove me absolutely insane during my playthrough. Between the shouts of suck it down and skull fucking time, I was seriously confused about whether or not my companions wanted to kill the monsters or engage in sexual relations. It was kind of tough. I don't really like the implication. There's a really nice touch with the walls as you get closer to the Gorgon Witch. Medusa faces lining the walls with glowing green eyes that were super creepy. I liked it a lot. In general, I liked all of the detailed texture work that went into this game. It's really fucking pretty, kids. Are you tired of me saying that yet? Okay, cool. So Medusa... Yeah, if you so much as pause for a second in Medusa's line of sight, you are pretty much guaranteed turned to stone. Get out the Eye of Zeus, lay low, use cover, and zap her ass a good 2 or 3 times, and this is just another joke boss fight.
Good riddance.
Hiro, look!
Amazing. The sword must be absorbing whatever residual mystical energies remained in Medusa's body after her death. I wonder if... Oh no.
What is it? Oh, at least we know what happened to him.
Superfly. It's good to see you. We feared the worst.
Believe me, so did I. Getting stuck in a state of living death isn't exactly my idea of a fun time.
Oh no.
Do you hear it too, or is it just me? Alright, a couple more monsters turned back to life from stone later, and we're ready to end this episode.
We've lingered here long enough. Time to find Mishima and give him his comeuppance.
And how do you propose we do that?
I'm hoping the Daikatana was charged enough by the energy it absorbed from Medusa to open up a time portal.
So what's the problem? Give it a shot.
I've never tried anything like this before. I'm not sure how to summon the sword's mystical properties. Maybe if I concentrate, focus my thoughts.
And that was the Grease Epoch. A much better experience than... Oh, fuck this guy again.
Mishima!
Misguided fools. Did you really think it would be that easy to escape my notice? With time as my ally, nothing shall stand in the way of my plans for world domination, not even you.
Of all the self-serving drivel.
Nice try, hero. But your control over the Daikatana's mystical properties is limited at best. And no mere novice is going to take down a master.
Don't bet on it, Mishima. Your own arrogance will be your downfall.
We'll see about that.
Well, kids, it looks like it's out of the frying pan and into the fire for Hiro and crew. We might be leaving Greece behind. Now it seems like we've hit something a little bit more medieval in nature. So what's going to happen next? Is the game going to continue its momentum of goodwill and keep getting better, or is it possible that the shitstorm is truly about to begin? Well, find out next week when we do part 2 of the Daikatana review, Die Another Day. Until then, Stay safe, stay hydrated. See you then, kids.